TV shows, these politicians, they always go like this. So.
Oh yeah, the soft thumb.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, we're live. Here we go. Hey everybody, this is Caro Gladstone. Welcome to REVERB, the United Methodist Young People's Podcast. Today we are sitting down with Brad Fiscus and Stephanie Caro, who have just authored a new book called Smaller Church Youth Ministry. No staff, no money, no problem. I love it. Welcome, guys. Thanks for being with us today.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
We'd like to give people a chance to tell us, how did you get to this point in your ministry? Where'd you come out of, and what led you to the creation of this book together? Brad, you want to start?
Sure. I am the director of Next Gen Discipleship for the Tennessee Conference of the United Methodist Church, and we have about 600 churches, and about 82% of those churches worship 99 or less, and so we saw the need to begin developing coaching and resources and training to specifically address that demographic, and I grew up in a small church, a Methodist church in Sharpsville, Indiana, and a small town, and have always had a heart for that, and served in a smaller church that's now grown to a medium-sized church. And so I just had the opportunity to take some of that we've learned there, and then working with a great person like Stephanie, who is very wise and knows small churches across the world, really, especially the United States. So we had the opportunity to partner together there. So, Steph?
Well, I came to a small church youth ministry in a sort of roundabout way. I was serving in all larger churches with larger youth groups, and then this church in St. Pete, I kind of said, hey, what's going on in the youth ministry? And found out there was about 9 kids in the church. And so I contacted some friends of mine at Group Publishing and said, what's out there for smaller church youth ministry? And the editor of Group Magazine's, Rick Lawrence, said, hey, really nothing. Why don't you write it? And so, I published a few books from through Group Publishing, and I have a column in the magazine about smaller church ministry, and so we just sort of figured it out together. And then Brad and I met up at a conference I was teaching at, Simply Youth Ministry, back in
2000, yeah,
something like that, maybe. Yeah. And we just said, well, maybe we could do something together. And we started our first year's training for 10 churches in the Florida, not in the Florida conference, in the Tennessee conference. And that's sort of how it came to be.
Yeah.
Here we are.
So when we're talking about smaller church youth ministry, what is the size of the churches that you're thinking of? And typically, what is the size of that youth ministry then that you'll be working with?
So the average size United Methodist Church across the U.S. is 76. Denomination
total membership.
Worship attendance.
Okay.
United Methodist Church, it's about 82 or so, depending upon what you look at. Mm-hmm. And so with Ministry Architects, they had sort of created an area that they were going to focus on specifically for churches 150 in worship or less. And so we've sort of taken that model, and we initially started with churches in that range of, 50, 20, some, I don't think we had any less than 50, but 50 to 99. We've had a couple of churches that were over 150 come through. And quite honestly, one was a little resistant, didn't think that because of the smaller church tag on there, they didn't believe that it applied to them, even though they operated many of the ways that they functioned without the systems and structures that were needed, to support good ministry, So,
mm-hmm.
But anyway, so that's sort of where we were, and we have a cohort each year of about. Our goal was we have 7 districts, and our goal was to have at least 2 from each district. But we've sort of settled in on 10 to 12 churches a year in those cohorts. So.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that I was, in addition to being a 30-plus year youth pastor in churches in the Florida Conference of the United Methodist Church, I'm also senior consultant for Ministry Architects. And so that's sort of how that came to be. I don't live in Florida anymore. I'm from Houston, But the main work of what I do is for ministry architects. And so thanks for kind of bringing that tag in, because that's how this whole thing sort of just blew up in a delightful way.
Yeah.
Right.
So we set the stage a little bit, kind of where are we coming from in ministry? What are the churches that we're working with? The subtitle of your book is intriguing. I know churches that work with youth ministry, they don't have any staff, but they still probably have some kind of, budget or resources to work from. What are some of the main takeaways that you're hoping people will at least consider when they pick up your book and read it?
Well, I think one of the things that we really try to make clear with the folks that go through our cohort and the way that we train is that it doesn't matter what size you are. You set yourself up for who you are and who you want to be. Right. And so if you're trying to do ministry and you don't have systems for how that ministry is going to happen, if people don't know what their roles are, if they don't understand why you're even doing ministry with young people, you're never going to reach any kind of capacity that you could reach if you just took time to plan, took time to be trained and to set a vision and so on. And so that's sort of where we start. And pushing back against, the book talks about in the first part, the power of being smaller. It pushes back against this small church mentality that says, well, we can't do that because we're small. And we help push it to flip it to say, well, because we're small, we can do these things, And Stephanie talks about that in different parts of the book, especially for her seeing the perspective of serving in a large church and some of the challenges there to then serving in a smaller church. So, Steph?
Yeah, we push them back in the sense that many small churches will use the fact that they're smaller as an excuse. Well, we can't do that. We can't do this. We can't have systems and processes. And we push them back and say, hey, the average size youth group in America is only 7 or 8 kids. Mm-hmm. And when our churches sort of realize that, they go, oh, so we're normal. And the funny, I guess it's funny ironic anyway, is that, we've got some folks out there in youth ministry who couldn't even imagine this, but it's not unusual for the small churches we work with to have less than $1,000 work within a year. Mm-hmm. To me, $1,000 is almost like having no money. You have to get very creative. And usually that winds up just being spent on taking them to events. They don't have the luxury of being able to go to Walmart and buy all the Sharpies they need. And they can't, even if you should play Chubby Bunny anymore, which
you shouldn't.
I'm still a fan, but anyway, they can't just go and buy all those marshmallows. Everything that comes to many of these small churches is strictly by donation, and people connected to it just the finances come out of their pocket half the time. But we don't let them use that as an excuse for not having an excellent standard. And that's what we try to teach them.
Sure.
And also pushing back on that issue too, to them, because I hear this all the time from especially youth ministry folks that have just entered ministry, and they'll call me and they'll say, well, Brad, we don't have enough budget. And I was like, but we have to do this fundraiser. And I talk about in the book, it's like, so when you have a fundraiser, start tracking who is giving you that money. And most likely it's going to be the people in the congregation. And so, start tracking that, and then start thanking them and say, how about if we then, instead of doing all these fundraisers, and we spend that time in spiritual development, because you're going to give that money in your tithe to the church, and then we're able to create a budget, and so that it's not self-funded often either, or a perpetual fundraising process that happens, So to really help the church understand that they are spending money on the ministry, it just needs to become more directed, because the story is being told about why they need the money, Yeah.
So in a church system where there's some budgeted funds that come to the youth ministry, there's some benefit there. The church is buying in or investing in the youth ministry. The deficit is it's unidentifiable dollars. Yes, I mean that money isn't necessarily tied with particular donors if
Right.
it's not set up to be. Right.
What we hear over and over again is, but you don't know our church. They give us everything we need. Our people are so generous. And so that is a particular, I think, quality, especially in smaller churches. It's something that we recognize. And really, we just kind of work with them through everything around that budgeting issue. We let them sort of figure that out, though what Brad suggested makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, rather than focusing on their finances, we really focus on their systems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like doing a great job at positive branding, doing a great job at contact management. Greatest example, today is November 1st. Every church in the world this last weekend had a trunk or treat. So if you're going to have 200 children come into your church parking lot, figure out a way to follow up with those kids and invite them to breakfast with Santa at Christmas.
Right.
And find a way to invite them to your Easter egg hunt. So we just kind of help them realize they don't have to be the big fancy church with a lot of admin help. They can do it themselves, and they'd be surprised at how much growth they can see just by reaching out to people.
And that's, she's talking about the folks that you bring and that come into those special opportunities, whether it's trunk or treat or Christmas or whatever. But we've also found that many of these churches, they don't have a clear list of who should actually be already coming to their ministry, so they don't know who the students are, who the young people are in their congregation, because no one's ever taken the time to create just a spreadsheet with their names. And so one of the things that we added to this year's cohort, and we tend to we sit back and each year and talk about how do we make adaptions, add new things. So, Google has given us a gift, at least for now, Google using Google Docs and Google Forms and Google Slides or whatever. And so this year we made a commitment to teaching these the ministry teams how to use Google to create basically a database for their church, especially their young people. We actually help them create an attendance form so that all they have to do is put it on their phone and say, when Jimmy shows up, they press a button, hit submit, and it's tracking that their attendance. They don't have to go and spend a bunch of money on these different specialized tracking softwares. That's great if you have the resources, but they don't have the resources. And so why not utilize Google or some other type of system that you already have?
Yeah.
And so that's what we've done.
It sounds like you're also kind of pitching a new norm, or like a reclaimed norm. So often the story of successful youth ministry happens around the cool youth guy and the relational capital that one person can build into a system. And sounds like you're making the case that there's amazing unrecognized relational capital in any size church, in any community.
Yeah, and it's the same thing goes for that pastor-centered model that pretends to be perpetuated in a smaller congregation. We want the pastor to be involved, but we don't want it to be centered around what the pastor can or cannot do. And so we're about putting together a team of people. With that, maybe somebody will emerge from that team that might become that point person, and you want somebody to take some ownership of that role, right? But research in faith development shows that young people and people of developing faith need to have multiple faith partners. And so we want that team. We want the ministry for young people, for children's ministry, for adult ministry to be wide in terms of the influence and connection to the people in the church. And so we spend a lot of time on, we talk about the importance of coming as you are and learning how to be in relationship with each other and learning how to understand what it means to be radically hospitable, but also connectionally driven, to where it's about the relationships. It's about sharing who you are. The Growing Younger study that just came out from the Fuller Youth Institute talks about that young people today they want authenticity over flashy and cool, you know? And so like we have a lady, a friend of mine, she and I and my wife and her husband, it was over 10 years ago because there was a significant birthday for me then, but we all were in discipleship Bible study together. And now 10 years later, Pat and her husband moved to another town and a much smaller church. And she stepped in, a grandma, no kids in that church, no grandchildren in that church. She saw a need for a youth ministry there, and she took that on. And so she continually tells Stephanie and I, she's not a youth minister, and we keep saying, yes, you are, you know. And she's approaching, you know, she's in her late 60s and just loving on kids, and it's growing, you know.
Yeah. In fact, the flashy youth guy is very rarely the youth leader in a smaller church. And you know what? The students don't care. They're just happy that they have each other, and they're happy that they have adults that circle around them. And, you know, actually from an intergenerational sense, it works even better because the youth leader is, like Brad said, maybe a grandma or a mom or, you know, or sometimes a couple in the church. And those are folks that are really, they're going to stay because they're already members of the church. And so the roots really grow deep. And we list it as one of the advantages of being in youth ministry in a smaller church.
Yeah. Is there a similar re-envisioning of the role of youth in a smaller church youth ministry? Something that, are there assumptions that you can free youth up from? I'm thinking, you know, the difference between youth who are the consumer of a program that is provided for them, as opposed to possibly being more of the agents of the ministry themselves.
Great question. One of the beauties, I think, another advantage is that in a smaller church, children in youth ministry generally tends not to operate separately from each other, because it really takes everybody to make a children's ministry and youth ministry work. So really, in fact, in a church with, you know, less than 100 in worship, it really is intergenerational. Every event is integrated because it takes all of them to make it work. If they did have trunk or treat, it wasn't just the youth program running it, like maybe in a larger church, or the youth program or the children's ministry doing the fall festival. It took everybody. And so it's probably closer to this ideal picture that we hear about when we read a book like Growing Young, or any of the Sticky Faith stuff, or the Orange, any of that stuff that really talks about having not only the horizontal relationships, but having the vertical relationships along the generations.
Yeah.
And we have, there's a church in our cohort right now, Martin's Chapel, which is out in McMinnville, sort of southeast edge of our conference. And they started out basically as a church plant in a church that was built by slaves back in this, post-Civil War, freed slaves. It closed, and then there was a woman there that said, "Hey, I need to start a church," and so she was able to take that building. Well, fast forward today, I've visited there, and their children and youth are fully integrated into that service. They are more integrated there than any other place that I've seen, where they may give the sermon that one day. They're singing the main songs, or they're giving the leading the liturgy, or the pastoral prayer, and helping assist with communion. They're fully integrated into what's happening there. And then we have, go ahead, Steph.
Well, yeah, and not because it's Youth Sunday,
right?
Because it's Church Family Sunday, and that's what they all do.
Yeah, we tend to, and I when I hear from one of our smaller congregations say, "We're going to have a Youth Sunday," I almost get hurts my heart a little bit, because it's like, yes, we, that's great, and we want them to be fully engaged in all parts of the service. but you have the unique ability to have them fully engaged, like Martin's Chapel does every Sunday.
Every week.
You know, and so and then when it happens, it's not like this, oh, look how great our youth are. They're already seeing how important the ministry is to young people. You ask about another church, to tell a couple stories, and Stephanie fell in love with this congregation, and they're celebrating their 5 years this Sunday. It will be the 5th year of their existence. It's called Ebenezer Hispanic Fellowship.
Oh, I love them.
And they, when they started in our cohort, they had been doing youth ministry for about a year at that time. But they realized that the only kids that they had in their congregation were the children of the pastor and 1 or 2 of the other leaders. And so, and they didn't know where those kids were going to come from. So, but they realized that on Sundays there was a soccer league down the street from where they met. They went over and started hanging out there, the pastor, the youth ministry volunteer folks, and started asking questions. You know, what do you need? You know, like, how can we serve you, as opposed to you come and be a part of us so you can serve with us, you know, but how can we serve you? And so they realized that those young people didn't have healthy snacks, and they didn't have, you know, something to drink and things like that. So they started saying, okay, we can do that. So they started making the snacks and providing drinks, and that they started to feed them physically, you know, that Jesus's model, of feeding them physically, give them something to eat. And then as they start to say, well, what is different about these folks? And then they started to talk about Jesus. And then they started to talk about, well, hey, we have this going on. And they grew tremendously, right, Stephanie? And it's amazing. I think they grew up to where they had some 40-some kids that were actively involved in their youth ministry. And we helped them get a van. And then just this last week or so, the pastor came in and said, we have grown so much that we feel like now as a congregation, we want to hire somebody. And I told her when she said, we want to hire somebody to do youth ministry, I said, no. And I said, that's not the right wording. And she said, oh, I know what you mean. But somebody to help them with making sure that there's that constant focus, that constant connection. So to hire a youth ministry person to come in and help coordinate with the parents who speak Spanish, but children speak English. So it's got to be somebody that's bilingual. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that came as Hispanic or Latino themselves, but how cool would that be if that continued development and that becomes a cycle of generating new leaders in the church, you know?
And it was simple as so many small churches say, how do we get people to come through our doors? All they did was they figured out a way to take children's youth ministry to where the kids were. Mm. And so they held it out there at the soccer field. I mean, it's as simple as that. And their story's amazing.
Yeah. So Jesus wouldn't have started a petition to ban Sunday sports. That's not how he would have.
He would not.
No, I don't think so. No. Yeah, I don't think so. I think he would have wanted to be out there playing soccer himself, you know. Like, yeah.
That's exactly right. He just would have gone where the people were, because that's what he did all the time.
Yeah.
And in any community, that context will be specific, right? It'll be the soccer league here. It'll be the book club or the battle of the bands there. It'll be lots of different things.
It may be as simple as like in our church, we're not a smaller church, but we have an enormous, we have a really great high school band. Okay. Mm-hmm. Marching band. They win awards and so on. And so there was a group of kids that because of that band schedule, they were often being left out, not intentionally, but unintentionally were just getting left out or didn't fit into the youth ministry that was happening. And so a lady in our church said, well, let's start a youth orchestra. And so these kids that weren't coming to youth on a regular basis, they began utilizing something they were passionate about. Their instruments, you know, trombones, saxophone, flutes, clarinets, so on. So, and trumpets, created this small, this ensemble of 6 to 8 kids, and they are amazing. They played a couple Sundays ago, and I'm an emotional guy sometimes, and I was almost tearful, and I was thinking about, man, how do we get that in front of how do we get that in front of to celebrate that in front of the other kids that are in the conference who think they don't have a place to connect because they're passionate about something that doesn't match the model of their church. So Miss B, she's their youth minister for this orchestra, know?
Yep, that's right. And don't let Brad fool you. He's an out and out crier.
I get emotional sometimes. So, but the book, what we tried to do in the book was tell some of the meat of and talk about some of the meat of what we teach in the training, but also have real stories and real input from churches who participated in the cohort. So each chapter, there's at least one story from a church leader who was in the cohort. And then there's the meat of the chapter, a story, and then at the end of each chapter, there's a response. And Stephanie wrote a response to 6 of the 8, and I wrote a response to one of them because Stephanie wrote chapter 7 about critical mass, and then chapter 8 is 50 quick tips. And those quick tips, the majority of those came from our coaches that we've developed this year. We've added to our team 3 youth ministry leaders who have served in small churches, have gone through training with Stephanie and I, who come to the cohort trainings, and they have began the process. This call that they're on right now, they've fully led those series of calls with their churches, and each of them have 3 to 4 churches that they're coaching. They're going and visiting them throughout the year. They're a place for them to call and say, hey, I really need some support. What can we do about this? And our goal is to add 1 to 2 more coaches in the 2017-18 cohort year. So that and then because of that, I think that we can expand from saying to have 10 to 12 churches to possibly having as many as 16 to 20, where each of those coaches has 4 to 5 churches that they're actively coaching. Because the need is great, and the excitement that has come from the churches in the cohort has rippled across our conference, and then also because we've had the ability, what I love about the Methodist Church is that we're connectional, so we're sharing information. And so as we developed our model, we shared it with other conferences. And so Stephanie can tell you a little bit about that because she's out on the road a lot.
Yeah. Because of the work in the Tennessee conference, we now have a cohort in the Dakotas conference. And we're just beginning one this Saturday in the North Carolina conference. We've had one in the Indiana conference. We've had one for several years in the Arkansas conference. And so it just kind of keeps expanding from there. And, really it's about, it's just bringing these small churches some hope and letting them know that they can still just do great ministry with 70 people.
Mm-hmm.
God is as present there as he is in the 7,000 member church. And it's really exciting work. I am lucky to get to do what I do. I'm blessed to get to do what I do.
Well, along with the action item of everybody heading over to the link in the show notes here to Youth Ministry Partners to order the book, are there other kind of action items that you're encouraging people to do to support smaller churches in their youth ministries, to learn more about this style of ministry, which I'm sure can be applicable really in any size church as we're thinking about building, off of the relational capital around you and not just about kind of a consumer-based idea of the big youth show.
Yeah.
What are some of the other action items that you'd encourage people to think about?
I would encourage them to think about changing their language, changing the way that they communicate about youth ministry and about children's ministry and so on, that it's ministry with young people, it's ministry with children. It's this combination that we're not providing ministry for the youth in our church or for the children in our church, that it's that we all are ministry in ministry with them. The way that we welcome people into our congregation on a Sunday morning when they walk through the door can become children's ministry and youth ministry. The way that we talk or not talk to people sends messages to folks that, just to say, let's take ownership. Let's start with this ownership of saying, how do we help them know that this is a place that they are welcome, that they are loved, that they're needed, that they're valued, and that we want, there's a place for them to serve immediately, whatever their passion is, whether that's playing a trumpet or whether that's singing a song or reading or speaking or, cleaning up, whatever it is. Find me a kid that wants to clean up and I need him at my house. But, but it's one of those things, changing the way that we talk about ministry with younger people, because there's been a lot of talk over these last several years. I don't know when it started, that we're doing it for them. Young people want to be engaged in it. My son, for example, he's the tech guy. He started partnering with our tech guy, and last Sunday he was running the soundboard and the computer all at the same time. And he's 12, 13. And so finding a place for them to plug into what they're passionate about, giving them the opportunity, take a risk, Steph?
Yeah, I would say I agree with everything Brad just said. If there are churches out there that want some specific ways to, and maybe a little coaching, you just want to have some conversation, email me at stephanie@ministryarchitects.com. Easy address, stephanie@ministryarchitects.com. And I'll just share with you a gripping long list of specific resources that are available just to help support small churches and let them know that they're doing great stuff. I'll be happy to chat through things with them.
Well, Brad, Stephanie, thanks so much for talking with us today. The book is Smaller Church Youth Ministry. No staff, no money, no problem.
No problem.
It has a really cool soft cover too. I like to just like a soft T-shirt. So, but yeah, it's really cool looking, and
that was not awkward at all.
It wasn't. It's like I just hold it, and it'll be available. I'm sorry. If you're in Cincinnati at the National Youth Workers Convention coming up in November, later on in November, we'll have copies available. I'll be there at the booth one day. Stephanie's teaching a class, right? There?
Yeah, no,
not this year, but we will be
next year.
We will be, but we'll come and speak with you. So you've got our emails, so we expect to hear from you.
Thanks again, and prayers for all of those churches out there who are reclaiming the title of smaller church and re-envisioning the ways that they're in ministry with youth and children and all ages for the glory of God. Thanks, friends.
Thanks, Carl.
Carl.